Hello, this is Dr. Carolyn Sutton Clark, and I present my paper for the World Dance Alliance 2020 conference through video from my home in Roswell, Georgia, in the United States. Thank you for watching, and please forgive any technical glitches that may occur. The title of this paper is Navigating Dunedin, New Zealand Through Dance. We open with a story. On a promenade overlooking St. Clair Beach in Dunedin, New Zealand, two lines of dancers face each other in the ocean air. Les Belles Vilaines, the beautiful villains, wend their way through 17th century French country dance. Kay, a middle-aged Asian woman, dresses like a gentleman to represent the men, while Tamsin holds a smartphone forward to play the music, volume at full blast but barely discernible over the winds from Antarctica. At Larnock Castle, up the bay a little way, a group of Chinese day tourists from a cruise ship take in the Scottish Gothic pile on hilltops dotted with sheep. A local girl from a Japanese family deftly charms them with her intricate Scottish Highland dancing. She is supposed to be in school, however, and needs to stop doing these gigs. University students sit close to each other, as many as the room will allow. All of the lights are turned off, and black cloths conceal every crack where light may shine. From the total darkness, instructors begin chanting in Te Reo Maori, and students repeat the words back. This is the Maori Studies 108 class, learning the next kapa haka in the dark. Dance happens within ever-changing intersections of circumstance, some generated through location. By way of illustration, this paper presents an ethnographic mapping of one such place, Dunedin, New Zealand, a Pacific community abundant with dance forms that dynamically emerge and reiterate. As the recipient of a 2017 Caroline Plummer Research Fellowship in Community Dance, hosted by the University of Otago, I conducted 6 months of research centered in the creation of a purposefully diverse, community-based dance oral history archive. Ultimately, I interviewed 30 dancers representing 22 forms of dance. Themes emerging from interviews, experiences, and the affordances of location and identity reveal how dance exists within this city. Considered to be the oldest colonial city in New Zealand, as an intersection of global cultures iterated by local practitioners. Accordingly, this research analyzes a multiform community, including Maori, hip-hop, French Renaissance, Bharatanatyam, and many others, defining themselves in relation to place and a sense of purpose. The data reveal the meanings and connections that dance has for those who find their way. This paper further addresses the theme of this conference, navigating location, negotiating identity by connecting the varied oral histories of participants with interdisciplinary scholarship in human geography, notably in relation to geographer Amanda Rogers' theories of performing intercultural aesthetics and migrant mobilities, inspired by cultural theorist Michel de Certeau's performative strategies and tactics. Through coming to know these dancers in Dunedin, one comes to know the city itself, moving with its spatial affordances, tensions between colonizers and the previously colonized, and generational shifts. This research is important because it illustrates how dance functions to navigate interculturalism, diverse community making, and everyday living. I'm also mindful of how circumstances have changed since submitting this proposal before the pandemic disrupted geographies of dance so fundamentally. Based on both testimonies and theory, I present this research now as reassurance that dance has resilience through a continuous process of reconstellating with creativity, movement, place, and people. Dunedin is known throughout New Zealand as a unique little city. Its original name is Otapoti, a Te Reo Maori word, the meaning of which is the subject of ongoing debate. Dunedin's identity centers in two cultural narratives. One, colonization by the Scottish and maintaining a strong Scottish heritage, and two, being a university town whose students, faculty, and staff impact city life. The name Dunedin comes from the Celtic words for Edinburgh, and Scottish settlers attempted to reconstruct Edinburgh on this site without regard for its Antipodean, indigenous topography. An apt metaphor for colonization. The area is geographically isolated, surrounded like a bowl by hilly ranges, except for where the town meets the ocean, preventing easy expansion into suburbs. Given these circumstances, combined with its often cold, gloomy weather, the population has not increased as swiftly as the rest of New Zealand over the years, but grows from 100,000 to 120,000 people when university students are in residence. Dunedin has a reputation of being whiter and older than other areas in the country, although the universities and hospitals attract new residents and their families from all over the world. However, people tend to leave Dunedin after they graduate to seek out opportunities elsewhere and see more of the planet. All of these factors impact dance practices. I had the opportunity to map Dunedin through dance as a research fellow. The more that I traveled to different studios, performance venues, and homes, the more fleshed out Dunedin became in my understanding through spaces where I had experiences with dance. The field of human geography theorizes places in a similar way. Areas shaping unique human encounters while simultaneously being shaped by those encounters, always in the process of becoming dynamic assemblages of meaning. More about human geography. Around the turn of the 21st century, the field of geography began grappling. Let's see if I can move myself here. There we go. Began grappling with philosophical crisis regarding how to apply postmodern. Oh, good, we're still rolling. Postmodernist interrogations of truth claims and their signifiers, such as maps. Geographer Nigel Thrift's 1997 article on dance in the text Geographies of Resistance furthermore proposes a movement-centric perspective that, in my opinion, can provide vital advocacy for dance in all its variety and potential. Thrift describes his non-representational theory as the geography of what happens. In other words, non-representational theory posits that the world is always moving and explores how human bodies happen together with their environments. This emphasis on what happens in a place comes from intersecting discursive spaces of human geography with performativity in theater and dance. In doing so, non-representational theory offers to dance studies a disruption of hierarchies and more room for local voices. It enables us to take seriously how dance happens in ways that are, in Thrift's words, quote, contingent, messy, and unpredictable, but at the same time full of potential, end quote. I am further influenced by human geographer Elizabeth Richardson, who in 2013 identifies a theoretical framework emerging from the intersections of cultural geography, postmodernism, and performance. Richardson outlines 3 analytical sensitivities for the performing arts offered by human geography. 1, the importance of individual stories and everyday experiences, such as those shared in this research. 2, an emphasis on difference and plurality, literally and imaginatively making spaces for diversity and inclusion. And 3, dynamic concepts of place in terms of creation, dissolution, and potentialities. Also, human geographer Amanda Rogers, in her 2018 article, Advancing the Geographies of the Performing Arts, elucidates how local artistic practices are co-constituted by the actions of persons in emergent geographies. From this point of view, people practice dance as a tactic of living, to reference de Certeau, in relationships with location and identity. Simultaneously, location and identity are constituted by dancing. In Dunedin, then, many cultures of dance forms coexist, not despite their place, but because of it. Earlier scholarship on interculturalism could not reconcile how the mixing of cultures might occur without diminishing something termed authentic, often based on understandings or misunderstandings of origin. After postmodernism, however, local iterations of dance have gained legitimacy as their own unique happenings. Rogers' summation of the field of human geography and its reliance on the philosophies of Jacques Deleuze and Félix Guattari explains how rhizomatic geographies of individual experience, stories, and change are vital towards gaining a more nuanced appreciation of dance in society. Quote, these rhizomatic geographies are potentially resistant to dominant structures and representations that deny cultural modification by bounding or freezing culture, particularly to specific locations. Instead, Rhizomes develop new forms, relations, collaborations, and solidarities that are forged across difference. Imagining cultural production as a process that resists essentialism by being difficult to locate, end quote. Rather than being watered down substitutes for dance that may claim origins specific to another location in the world, instances of dance have their own vitality and validity that negotiate world making. Rogers refers to this as migratory mobility. A prime example of this in Dunedin is the proliferation of Scottish country and Highland dancing halfway across the planet from Scotland, propagations from the city's days of Scottish colonization. Highland dance teacher and judge Jackie CQ elaborated for me how New Zealand has its own style of this form. Quote, "It's actually different than the rest of the world. There's some technical differences, actually more sort of balletic, I would say, whereas the Scottish style is more athletic. Like they bend the supporting foot out, whereas we don't. We straighten," end quote. Rhizomatic story. Mary Ronnie is 90 years old, moves well, and is sharp as a tack. At her cottage, Mary and I share tea and candy from Scotland while looking through a collection of booklets filled with directions for Scottish country dances, some of which are reputed to be hundreds of years old. She insists that I accompany her to Scottish country dance next Tuesday night at the church up the road. There, the large group of participants are mostly in their 60s through 80s. I use every skill I have to make it through a reel. Throughout, I am guided by skillful hands pulling me through or gentle pushes to turn me around. There is a public perception that dance in Dunedin is sparse and not particularly diverse. Even my hosts at the university were skeptical that I could find enough people to interview. Based on past experience, though, I expected that I might find many outlets for dance hiding in plain sight. Once it was made clear that I sought out diversity rather than only theatrical forms, people became energized talking to me about the tango studio next door or the tribal belly dance they saw at a festival. Dance materialized throughout the city. Yet foremost in my mind was acknowledgement of the indigenous people, the Maori. I was told that in a bigger city on the North Island, like Auckland, the Maori and other Pacific Islanders are, quote, everywhere. However, in Dunedin, I had to venture beyond the dance studios, clubs, and performance venues. One reason was that some movement forms do not self-identify as dance defined by Euro-US academics. My audience for this presentation today of the World Dance Alliance knows how this statement resonates with some Asian and Pacific forms. Artificially dividing activities that include movement, speaking, singing, ritual, visual, and other elements into foreign taxonomies effectively recolonizes those cultural practices. As an academic researcher, I began my journey with my host institution and its Department of Maori, Pacific, and Indigenous Studies at the University of Otago, who were welcoming throughout my stay. During her interview, I asked Dr. Karen Paranatai about the presence of Maori in Dunedin. She replied, quote, "They are hidden communities, and not because they're hiding, but because it's just a part of life, not necessarily what we think of as something we get together and practice," end quote. The places where a majority of people in Dunedin engage in interculturalism with Maori ways of living seem to be educational settings, ranging from primary schools to university courses and introductory sessions arranged for the community. Dunedin native and research participant Pessamino Tili has facilitated the learning of Pacific movement forms in private, primary, secondary, and tertiary education for many years. His own journey, negotiating his Samoan identity through dance, began in high school. Tili recalled that the teacher in charge of programming for the school's annual cultural night said that she was, quote, sick of all the Highland dancing, end quote, and asked him to perform dance from Samoa. Tili quickly agreed, then realized he didn't know any. Nonetheless, from there, he organized a school-based Pacific dancing group and began touring throughout all the public schools, learning as he went. Over the years, he has joined every Pacific Island dance organization in the area. Teely recognizes that there are not enough people in Dunedin with knowledge of the Pacific cultures like himself that can be responsive to the community, quote, especially when you have schools with a whole lot of Pacific children, and yet the culture of the school does not reflect the culture of the student. I believe that teaching Pacific dance is something that is really, really important, end quote. Through teaching dance in the schools, he creates places of learning in mutually responsive relationships with their location and population, the work of human geography. Teely explained, quote, I think if I do what I did in Auckland, it's like, so what? Where here it actually makes an impact, end quote. Lily Collins, a young woman I interviewed with pale skin, green eyes, and blonde hair, there she is, presents a striking example of how schools facilitate interculturalism through performing arts. At about the age of 13, the principal of her school tapped her on the shoulder in the hallway and said, quote, you're on the Maori roll, and we need more people for kapa haka. You should do it, end quote. But that was how she found out that she had Maori ancestry. From there, her journey of identity has become her life's work, learning and teaching Te Reo Maori. I concluded my research by organizing a culminating dance festival hosted by the large Dunedin Art Museum. While I had the option to simply switch groups out of a main area, I felt that I might present each group in a different gallery. I liked the metaphor of the audience interacting with dance by moving around the building, similar to how I had encountered dance by moving around the city. As hip-hop teacher Lisa Wilkinson stated, quote, there's a whole lot of dance in Dunedin, and we all exist in these different pockets doing our own thing, but we all respect each other, end quote. That neighborliness has also emerged as an analytical theme. When Sarak teacher Tom Campbell described how Dunedin had a certain, quote, flavor, end quote, he elaborated that it was due to the city's smaller size. Quote, I think in bigger centers, the people at the top with their trickle-down effect have really set the foundations for what other dancers will emulate. But down here, it feels that there are no real cliques. If you're new, it's easy to break in and find your feet and feel like you've got a place and you belong, end quote. Of the many groups who chose to perform, audience members told me they were most surprised by the Chinese Association, saying that they had no idea there was Chinese dance in Dunedin. This is an interesting perspective, considering that in the history of the area, Scottish colonizers brought in Chinese laborers to build the railroad and area infrastructures, and many of them ended up staying. As it happened, the Maori whom I invited to participate in whatever way they chose did not attend the culminating festival. I felt that this reflected my experience of Dunedin in some ways. As Perinatai had told me, the Maori have their own ways of living and navigating interculturalism that are different than the larger populations that exist in cities of New Zealand's North Island. And I felt a sense of rightness that the space existed for them here to choose not to participate. In this case, absence from public performance does not mean absence of cultural practice. Rather, absence functions as tactics of identity making through locating where one dances. 3 years later, I present this research to you from wherever you may be, from my home in Roswell, Georgia. In so doing, we open new possibilities for dance through discussion of Dunedin as a Pacific community suffused with movement diversity. Human geography offers the perspective that spaces of dance, real and virtual, are created between persons in those, quote, contingent, messy, and unpredictable ways that are at the same time full of potential, end quote. The stories of participants suggest a dynamic, interactive mapping of dance practices that invokes other times and locations while resisting placement. Thank you.